Good morning and welcome to Storyline Christian Church. I'm so excited that you're here with us this morning. We believe God has something incredible to teach you through today's service. We're going to be continuing our series this morning in 1 Corinthians, looking at the importance of unity in the church. Go ahead and check out this video.
Hey Storyline, so glad that you can join us today. We're going to be continuing our series that we started a few weeks ago where we're looking at the book of 1 Corinthians and seeing what it holds for us today. And what we're going to be looking at in today's message is we're going to be looking at Paul addressing some disputable matters. He's going to address how we should interact with the freedoms that we have, the rights that we have, how we should go about navigating these disputable matters within the church that are creating division. And in 1 Corinthians, what we're going to see is that Paul's addressing some specific issues that were facing this church that were creating just massive divisions. Things like, should we eat food sacrificed to idols? Should we wear head coverings in our worship services? And Paul is addressing these and saying, here's how you can interact with your freedoms, your rights to do these things, because it's kind of a gray area in the Bible. And here's how you can do so in a way that doesn't create disunity, but creates unity. And the church is fighting over these things, and it's getting nasty, and people are dividing themselves based off their own wisdom, and they're creating these camps. Like, I'm team eat meat from idols, and I'm against that, and it's just getting so nasty and so divisive. And I don't know about you, but that kind of sounds like the church today, doesn't it? I mean, obviously not the same issues. We're not talking about the same things, but we still fight over all these things today. Like, is it okay for a Christian to drink beer? What should our stance be on this political issue? How should we interact with the culture around us? What kind of music should we play in church? Can we run in church? Can we say these kinds of words? What's okay for Christians to do and not do? We still fight over all these things. We have these competing voices of wisdom within the church telling us how we should act, how we should live, who we should vote for, all this stuff. And here's the key. What I'm talking about here is disputable matters. There's things in the Bible that it's clear on, that they tell us how to live. But there are these other areas that are more gray. And what was happening in the church in Corinth, what I see all around us today, is that we like to create camps around these competing things of wisdom. Like, say, I'm right and you're wrong, and here's why. And it creates this division within the church. It turns the church from something incredible into something less than. And the reality is, there are areas of our life that the Bible doesn't tell us how to live, and we have the right, we have the freedom to live how we see best. But the problem is, often around these areas, we create division. We use our knowledge to show why we're right and they're wrong. And that's what's happening in the church in Corinth. People are demanding their way. There are people that see things differently, and they're demanding their rights. They're demanding that people look like them and act like them and do the things that they do. And maybe that sounds like a church you've been to, where the person demands what they want, a church full of people demanding that their rights be heard and followed. I was a part of a church when I was in college. One summer I did this internship. It was over the summer, and just 3-4 months, and I got to shadow this lead pastor around. One day after church, I was talking with their sound guy. And he was telling me about how there's some tension within their worship service. You see, they did what was called a blended worship service, meaning sometimes on a Sunday they would sing more traditional songs like hymns. And other Sundays, they would do more of a contemporary or modern set of songs with songs that were written within the last, 5-10 years. So more of a contemporary feel. And this sound guy, he told me what happened is, it didn't matter. Anytime they did a contemporary worship set, there is a certain group of people that would come up and complain about how loud it was. They wouldn't necessarily complain about the songs. They were just complaining about how loud it was. And this guy was getting frustrated with always having to kind of deal with this because he started recognizing it was just, when we play this song, I know after service I'm going to get a talking to by this person. So what he did is he went out and he bought a decibel reader. There's a little thing that you put in the middle of the room, and it tells you exactly how loud in decibels the song is. And what he did was, for weeks, he would just kind of record each song. And what he found was the traditional songs, the hymns, were substantially louder than the contemporary songs. And what he recognized was these people, they weren't complaining about the sound. They weren't complaining about how loud it was. They were complaining about their preference. They preferred the classical. They preferred the traditional over the contemporary. And whenever they didn't get their way, they complained about the sound. And so what he started doing was, when they would come back to complain, he'd say, you know what, Amazing Grace, when we sang that last week, was that too loud for you? Was that a good sound level? And be like, yeah, that was perfect. That was an incredible song. You did an excellent job mixing that. Say, actually, that was louder than this week. That was substantially louder than this week. And what he was helping them do was see that what they were really upset about was that their preferences weren't being met, because what was happening in the church was a divide was forming over what worship style was best. And now, one of those issues isn't right or wrong. It's not like contemporary or traditional is better than the other. No, it's just preference. But the problem happens is when Christians start taking their preference, saying you have to do it this way or else. They're taking a disputable matter, something we have the freedom to choose in, and demanding that their rights be heard. And it's not a sin issue, it's simply a preference. And like the church in Corinth, we often elevate our preferences too high. And when we do that, we create division. And it happens all the time in churches today. Maybe you've seen it, maybe you've experienced it. Maybe that's why you left a church. Maybe that's why you aren't interested in church anymore, because you went into this church and you just found it's ugly and divisive. They just argue over everything. You're like, I don't want to be a part of that. And you say, I've seen that in churches. I've seen people come into churches and demand that the church spends money this way and creates these kinds of programs. And if they don't do exactly what they want, they're going to leave. And they use this as like a threat, like, you better do what I want or else. And I've seen pastors demand things of their church that the Bible doesn't demand, that God doesn't ask of us. I've been in churches where people demand that people look a certain way, they dress a certain way, they act a certain way, that they avoid these kinds of words, that they do these kinds of things. I've seen obscure theological issues become the focal point, that we forget all the other things the Bible says and how we're supposed to live, and we focus on this obscure thing that doesn't really matter. I've seen churches split over the color of the carpet. They just can't decide what color to go with, and they just argue about these things and demand that their preferences and their rights be heard. And the message that we're going to look at today, what we're going to see Paul address today, is the challenge to shift our focus. You see, we are far too concerned with being right. We're far too concerned with our preferences and our freedoms being protected rather than loving our neighbor. And that's what Paul's going to address here. That's what Paul's going to address. That's what we're going to see. We're going to see that love sometimes requires us to lay down our rights for the sake of others, for the sake of gospel. And listen, we don't go after what we deserve. Followers of Jesus don't make demands, even though we might have the right to. We follow a God who gave up his rights for our sake. And now our call is to do the same. So let's jump into the text for today. We're going to be in 1 Corinthians chapter 8 and chapter 9. And like much of this series, we just don't have time to deal with every single issue. because there's just so much text that we're covering. So I would encourage you to go back and read 1 Corinthians 8 and 9 later, because there's a lot more in here that I think is incredible and powerful for each of us in our lives, in our faith, and I would encourage you to go back and read it. What we're going to be doing is taking a little bit more of a cursory look over these two chapters. So let's dive in and let's see what the issue the church in Corinth is facing. 1 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 1. Now, about food sacrificed to idols. So here's what's creating division in the church in Corinth. Here's what's causing all this drama. It's food sacrificed to idols. Now, animal sacrifice was extremely common in ancient times. And what would happen is you'd have this culture, in this case Corinth, all these people would go to these temples and they'd sacrifice these animals to these false gods, to all their pagan gods. And the thing was, this was so common, you had all these animals left over. So what do? Well, you take this meat that's still fine and you walk it down to the marketplace and you sell it at a discount. And so the church is divided over if it's acceptable for Christians to eat this meat. You see, some think it's wrong because this meat was sacrificed to an idol. And so they're in like camp, don't do it. Don't eat it. If you eat it, you're a sinner. And then you have this other group of people that they go down to the market and they look at the price of this ribeye. They're like, how can I not buy this? This is a steal of a deal. And so they're buying this ribeye and they're eating it. And then you have this other camp that's just all for this cheap meat. And these two camps are fighting. It's creating all this division. And it's not just division like they think they're right, but they're starting to fight each other. Like the people that are eating these ribeyes, they're like posting pictures on Instagrams and like waving in their face saying, look at what I'm eating, look how much money I'm saving. And there's this other group that's looking at them saying, you're sinners, you're gonna go to hell, you better stop that. And it's creating all this division. And Paul is writing this to address this issue to help them find unity in this disputable matter. And here's what Paul says. We know that we possess all knowledge, but knowledge puffs up while love builds up. I love that. Knowledge puffs up while love builds up. Those who think they know something do not yet know as they ought to know, but whoever loves God is known by God. Knowledge puffs up. Knowledge puffs up. Listen, I love to be right. I do. I love to show how much knowledge I have to prove that I know what I'm talking about. But really, if I'm really honest, I love to be right, not to help you, but to prove why I'm smart, to prove why I know something. I love to be right because it makes me feel better about myself, because I want others to think about me as somebody who's smart. And be honest, maybe that's you too. Because here's what Paul is saying. He's saying knowledge by itself puffs us up. It makes us feel good about ourselves, especially when we know something that somebody else doesn't. And that like describes our culture, doesn't it? I mean, pick whatever cultural issue we're facing, any of them. You have two competing sides that think they have knowledge behind them, and both sides aren't interested in helping the other side come to their truth or come to truth, right? What do they want to do? They want to prove why they're right and they're wrong. Both sides are so puffed up with knowledge, not to help somebody, but to prove why they're smarter than the other person. And it creates divides and an increasing gap in our society. Because all we care about is knowledge and being right and feeling like we're on team right, team truth. And the other people, well, they don't know what they're talking about. See, knowledge, it puffs us up. And that's what's happening in the church in Corinth. And what Paul is saying, he's saying love. When we focus on love, we build each other up. Really, it's not about being right. It's about doing what is right for the other person. Paul continues, verse 4. So then, about eating food sacrificed to idol, we know that an idol is nothing at all in the world, and that there is no one but God. Remember, knowledge puffs up, love builds up. Paul right here, he's making the case for knowledge. Verse 5. For even if there are so-called gods, lowercase g gods, whether in heaven or on earth, as indeed there are many gods or many lords, yet for us there is but one God, the Father, from whom all things came and for whom we live. There is but one God, Jesus Christ, through whom all things came and through whom we live. Paul's saying, listen, these idols, These gods, they're worthless. They're nothing. Like they don't exist. So does it really matter if you eat food that was sacrificed to nothing? What does it matter? This is what knowledge teaches us. They don't exist. So he looks at this group that's eating meat and saying, you're right. What's it matter if you eat that meat? It was sacrificed to nothing. So what does it matter? What's the big deal? And that's knowledge. That's what knowledge teaches us. But Paul continues, he's not done. Verse 7, but everyone who possesses this knowledge, he's about to switch to love here. Some people are still so accustomed to idols that when they eat sacrificial food, they think of it as having been sacrificed to a god. And since their conscience is weak, it is defiled. But food does not belong or does not bring us near God. We are no worse if we do not eat it, or no better if we do. And here's what Paul's saying. He's saying food doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. If you never eat that cheap ribeye again, it doesn't matter. Food does nothing. And I know some of you, you're thinking about that and you're like, I don't know about that. Like, I kind of like my meat. I kind of want to eat that steak. But what Paul's saying, he's saying, it doesn't really matter. Does that food bring you closer to God? Does it affect your life or faith in any meaningful way? I mean, compared to what Jesus has done, what difference does that food make? And if we're honest, we have to say, not much. Not much. So Paul's saying, why eat it then? Why eat it? Paul wraps up his argument in verse 9. He says, be careful, however, that the exercise of your rights does not become a stumbling block to the weak. Remember, he said eating meat sacrificed to idols, it's okay. They're nothing. But now he's switching. He's saying, be careful. You might have the right to eat that meat. You might have the right to buy that ribeye, but be careful that you don't become a stumbling block. For if someone with a weak conscience sees you with all of your knowledge eating in an idol's temple, won't that person be emboldened to eat what is sacrificed to idols? So this weak brother or sister for whom Christ died, same team, for whom Christ died, is destroyed by our knowledge. Our knowledge that puffs us up can also destroy those around us. When you sin against them in this way and wound their weak conscience, you sin against Christ. Therefore, if what I eat causes my brother or sister to fall into sin, I will never eat meat again, so that I will not cause them to fall. Paul's making a bold statement here. He's saying love is more important. Your brother and sister, they're more important than your freedom, than your right to go about that. He's saying it's more important than your freedom. Love is more important. The gospel is more important. And yeah, you might have the right to do that thing. You might have the freedom to do that thing. That thing might not be a sin in and of itself. Eating that meat, it ain't a sin. That's what Paul's saying. But what he's also saying is he's saying if you eating that meat causes your brother to stumble in their faith, causes your sister to walk away from God, that's a sin. He's saying we got to watch out. We got to be careful that our knowledge doesn't cause somebody else to walk away from their faith. Because knowledge puffs us up, but love builds others up. Paul continues this same theme in the next chapter of chapter 9, and we're going to skip ahead to this. And between what we're going to look at and what we just finished reading, there's a whole bunch of stuff, but Paul's just really addressing some of these other disputable matters in the church. And then he kind of wraps up or continues this thought in verse 19. It says this, though I am free and belong to no one, I have made myself a slave to everyone to win as many as possible. To the Jews, I became like a Jew to win the Jews. To those under the law, I became like one under the law, though myself am not under the law. So to win them to those under the law. To those not having the law, I became like one not having the law, though I am not free from God's law, but am under Christ's law. So to win those not having the law. To the weak, I became weak to win the weak. I have become all things to all people, so that by all possible means I might save some. I do this for the sake of the gospel, that I might share in its blessings. Here's what Paul's saying. He's saying love is important. Sure, we might have the rights, we might have the freedoms to do all these other things, but Paul's saying, listen, I will bend to whoever I'm around so that I can best show God's love to them. I'm going to do nothing that might cause this person to walk away from Christ. In fact, I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to do everything in my power to show the love of Christ to this person. I'm going to bend to who they are rather than demanding that my rights and my freedoms be heard. And do you hear the language Paul uses here? He says, I become a slave. Strong language. I become a slave to them. Not because I have to. No, Christ set me free. I become a slave to them so that they might see the love of Christ in me. And he's trying to convey the amount of love that we are to display, the extremes that we are to go to. And he's saying the gospel is more important than your freedom. Love is more important. Your brother and sister is more important. So focus on that. Don't demand that your preferences be heard. Don't demand that your freedoms be carried out. Don't think that your knowledge is all that you need. No, knowledge just puffs you up. Love builds others up. And can you imagine if this is what the church was known for today? If the church was known for being a church that loves, that builds others up, what if Christians acted like that? What if Christians became slaves to each other, to the world around them, so that they might show them Christ and what he's done? What if Christians didn't demand that their preferences for music be played in church? They didn't demand that the church bends to what they want, but instead insisted that the church postured itself in the way where it could best be the light on the hill shining to the community around them? What if the church wasn't so consumeristic and more interested in loving those around them? What if Christians weren't so focused on winning arguments, instead focused on loving their neighbors? What if Christians weren't so concerned with protecting their freedoms and instead focused on serving those around them? You see, we care far too much about being right. We care far too much about building our knowledge up. And we focus far too less on love. Church, I think we are puffed up. I think we're far too concerned with our knowledge, and I see endless arguments everywhere from Christians on why they think they're right on this or that, and why that other side is wrong. I see it everywhere. I see Christians arguing about drinking, Christians arguing about politics, Christians arguing about how what movies we can watch and how we should interact with culture and what songs we can sing, and can we have lights and haze in the church, how much money we should give, who we should vote for, and how we can do all these different things. Christians are just so consumed with being right and fighting over all these things, and this list goes on and on. Again, we're not talking about sin issues here. We're talking about preferences. We're talking about areas the Bible doesn't specifically address. But what we've done as a church is we've built so much of our knowledge up that we think we know what's better. And we want to impose that on everybody else that views it differently than us. And listen, that stuff, it doesn't matter in light of the gospel. It doesn't matter in light of what Jesus has done for us. Our call is not to have all the knowledge in the world. Our call is to love. Church, we've got to start focusing on building each other up. We've got to start focusing on what is the most important. What Paul is making clear here to the church in Corinth, I think it's applicable today, is that they value knowledge too much. And Paul's arguing that the goal of faith, the goal of following Jesus, isn't to gain more knowledge. It's to love. That's our goal. That's our job. It's not to be right about everything. I don't think we're going to get to heaven and stand before Jesus and he's going to grade us on our theology like, oh, good job, you got a 95% on your theology correct, or oh no, you only got 50%. That's not what we're going to be judged on. We're going to be judged on how we loved, how we cared for those around us. See, church, we're focused on the wrong thing. Focused on the wrong thing. And now we can't change everything. You and I, we can't change everything, but what we can change is ourselves. So I'm going to ask you to do is to spend some time this week, today, praying and thinking about how you are interacting with those around you. And I'm going to give you a question to help you. And the question is this: what am I doing that's keeping others away from Jesus? What am I doing that's keeping others away from Jesus? Now, it's not an easy question. But here, what I think the reality is you and me and each of us, we all have something we're doing that's keeping people away from Jesus. So what is that for you? I want to encourage you to spend some time praying about that and evaluating your life. What are you doing that's keeping others away from Jesus? Maybe it's demanding that the church bends to your preferences. Maybe it's demanding that you have the freedom to drink. Maybe it's demanding those that aren't following Jesus look like they are following Jesus, and you're trying to impose your Christian values on people that aren't even interested in following Jesus. Or maybe let me step on your toes a little bit. Maybe it's the way that you engage on social media. The things you say about people that view something differently than you. Listen, it's really hard to make disciples. It's really hard to love somebody when you demonize them on social media. So maybe it's your online presence is keeping people from following Jesus. Maybe your online presence is causing your brother or your sister in Christ to stumble. Or maybe it's the way that you stand for your political views, your political convictions. Listen, do you have the right to be a Republican? Yeah. You have the right to be a Democrat? Yeah. The Bible doesn't tell us how we should vote. It doesn't tell us which party we should align ourselves with. You have the right to hold your political views. But are you holding those views in such a way that's causing others to not be able to find Jesus? Because it's really hard. When you bash the other side, when you bash your opponents, you might be right. You might be. But if you use your knowledge to tear others down, even if you're right, what you're doing in the process is you're giving up your right to love and serve that person. You can't make a disciple out of somebody you demonize. You can't. And that's your mission. That's your call from God, is to love and make disciples. So what are you doing that's keeping others away from Jesus? That's what Paul is asking us in this text. He's challenging us to love, to stop creating divisions over these disputable matters. Remember, we're not talking about sin issues. We're talking about these gray areas in the Bible. And I know we like to build up our knowledge so it's not a gray area anymore. But it is, in light of the gospel and what Jesus has done for us. We shouldn't create divisions over all these other things. And instead, we should focus on love. So spend some time today thinking about that, praying about that. My prayer for Storyline is that we wouldn't be a church that has all the right answers. That we wouldn't be a church that just gains more and more knowledge. Rather, my prayer is that we become a church that loves, that serves, that builds others up, that becomes slaves to each other and to our community so that others might hear about Jesus. That's my prayer for you. That's my prayer for me. That's my prayer for this church. You see, when we fight for our rights, when we demand our freedoms, we lose the opportunity to serve. We lose the opportunity to love. And I pray that's not the case for you, for me, and for this church. Let's pray. God, we thank you. We thank you that you're the one person that had the right to demand what was rightfully yours, and instead you came to serve us. You put down your rights for our sake. God, I pray that we might be a church that does the same. We don't demand our rights, demand our preferences, demand our freedoms, but we might be a church that seeks to love and build others up, that puts down our rights for the sake of the gospel, for the sake of you, and for the sake of others in the community finding the love that you have for them. Pray that you help us do that this week. In Jesus' name, amen.
We want to give you guys a couple minutes just to reflect on today's message. We're going to be singing a worship song during this time. And so we just encourage you to take this time to really reflect, and pray, and just meditate on all that God is teaching you this morning. We also like to use this time to give our tithes and offerings. So if you've been partnering with us for a while now here at Storyline, you're welcome to use the link down below in the description to do so. If you're still checking us out though, there's definitely no pressure to give.
You are good when there's nothing good in me. You are love on display for all to see. You are light when the darkness closes in. You are hope, you are hope. You have covered all my sin.
You are peace when my fear is crippling. You are truth, even in my wandering. You are joy, you're the reason that I sing. You are life, in you death has lost its sting.
Sing, I'm running. And oh, I'm running to your arms. I'm running to your arms. The riches of your love will always be enough. Nothing compares to your embrace. Light of the world forever reign. Sing, you are more. You are more than my words will ever say. You are Lord, all creation will proclaim. You are here, of all else I'm letting go. You are God, of all else I'm letting go. And oh, I'm running to your arms. I'm running to your arms. The riches of your love will always be enough. Nothing compares to your embrace. Light of the world forever reign. My heart will sing no other name but Jesus, Jesus. My heart will sing no other name but Jesus, Jesus. My heart will sing no other name but Jesus, Jesus. My heart will sing no other name but Jesus, Jesus. Yes. And oh, I'm running to your arms. I'm running to your arms. The riches of your love will always be enough. Nothing compares to your embrace. Light of the world forever reign. I'm running to your arms. I'm running to your arms. The riches of your love will always be enough. Nothing compares to your embrace. Light of the world forever reign. Nothing compares to your embrace. Light of the world forever reign.
Thank you so much for joining us for today's service. I hope that you were challenged to stop focusing on acquiring knowledge and to start focusing on building each other up in love. Before you go, one last thing, I want to invite you to check out our launch team. This team is meeting weekly to help kind of prepare for our in-person services that are going to be launching in just a few months. And so I would encourage you, if you're interested in being a part of something meaningful, something impactful, something that for years to come will still be making an impact based on what is happening right now. I would encourage you to check out our website so that you can learn more about this team and what we are doing, and then also sign up to receive some more information about it. The link for that is in the description down below, so you can learn more about the launch team. Don't forget to join us next week as we continue this series. We'll see you there.